The Marvel Champions core box is the starting point of the game, and it's still to this day one of the best products ever released, if not the best product in Marvel Champions. All of the heroes that came in here are amazing. They're super fun to play. It's super thematic. The villains are really fun as well. And recently, I've returned back to the core box. After a long time of playing all the new stuff, I finally wanted to go back and see how I felt about it now that I've gained more experience with the game. And to do that, I started a progression series. So I'm going to start with the core box, play everything in the core box, and then slowly make my way forward towards the newest release. Currently, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is the new release, so maybe a long time in the future, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. will already be out, but it's not out right now. And this is the process that I'm thinking for this series. I'll start out by planning, looking at the new cards that come out in the packs, thinking about how are all these new cards going to affect all the old heroes, what kind of decks am I going to want to build, stuff like that. And then I'm going to play through it and then review it. And then after I finish the core box, move on to the next release. So the core box came out first, and then the next villain was the Green Goblin. So currently, after all the gameplays on my channel, I'm on step 3, where I will review the core box. And for this review, I'm going to go over a lot of stuff. So if you want to skip around just the parts you care about, feel free to do that. The first thing I'm going to talk about is just how to play each hero. And then I'll go over their strengths and weaknesses, my personal aspect preferences for each hero, and then a tier list of my hero preference, which I'm going to update every release. This is particularly interesting for me because my opinions are quite different than the first time I played the game, and I'm curious to see how all of these old heroes feel to me when I go through this in release order. Then I'll talk about the villains and how they work, and then go over a villain difficulty tier list that doesn't just cover one mode. I'm going to make one for solo and standard, for solo and expert, and then also multiplayer on standard, and then multiplayer on expert. And then also go over all of the matchups for these villains. And then after that, I'll make a hero power tier list in solo and multiplayer, and then sort of merge that into an overall tier list that I'll be keeping updated throughout the series, throughout my progression series. And then finally, to end this video off, I'm going to go over deck building. We'll talk about all the cards that came with the core box. It's still a lot of cards, but it's a small enough amount of cards that I'll actually be able to cover all of them and how they work. On to Captain Marvel. So Captain Marvel is a really fun hero. I liked her a lot. She was the one I kind of gravitated towards when I first started the game. Her hero card, she has a 2 thwart, 2 attack, 1 defense stat line with a rechannel action on the hero ability that says spend 1 energy resource and heal 1 damage from Captain Marvel. And then you also get to draw 1 card, but it's limited to once per round. She has 5 hand size, which is standard, and then 12 health, which is a bit above average. And then on her alter ego side, she has 4 recovery, 6 hand size, and then the commander action lets her choose a player to draw 1 card, which is also limited to once per round. And now if we look at her cards, they kind of group in my head like this. So this yellow box is energy resources to me because she loves her energy resources. So this is everything involved with that. The purple box is how she goes to alter ego. So Spider-Woman confuses, lets her go to alter ego. And then Alpha Flight Station has a huge advantage when you're in alter ego because you get to draw 2 cards, which is incredibly powerful. And then the last box in red is aerial stuff that she has in her kit. So let's start with the energy resources because this is the main part of her kit in my opinion. Energy Channel is an upgrade that's max 1 per player. She has 2 copies of this, so you can't actually have both of them out at the same time. That's a mistake I used to make when I played her. Makes her a lot better. But yeah, you can't have both of these energy channels out at the same time because it's max 1 per player. As an action, you get to spend X energy resources and then put X energy counters there. And then as a different action, you can attack, discard energy channel, and deal 2 damage to an enemy to a maximum of 10 for each energy counter. So the way this plays out is typically you'll put energy channel on the board because it's free, and then whenever you get excess energy resources that you don't necessarily need for something else, you'll put those on energy channel, and then when you need it, you can get a big burst of 10 damage from the 5 counters that you can get on energy channel. The obvious target here is energy absorption. This is a really unique card in the sense that it has a triple resource of all energy resources. This can easily charge up energy channel, and it can also fully pay for her attack event, which is Photonic Blast. Photonic Blast is a 3-cost event that says you can deal 5 damage to an enemy, and if you paid for this card using an energy resource, you get to draw a card. So this is a little bit lower damage than other heroes' signature attack events, but it has the added benefit of you getting to draw a card after you pay for it with an energy resource, which she can very easily do. So energy absorption, you'll be looking to spend on energy channel and photonic blast most of the time. And for alter ego, you have the Alpha Flight Station, which as an action you can exhaust Alpha Flight Station, choose and discard 1 card from your hand, and then draw 1 card. So you can do that in hero form because it's not specifically an alter ego action, but if you're in alter ego form, you get to draw 2 cards instead if you're a Carol Danvers. So in hero form, it's essentially just swapping a card, and then when you're in alter ego form, you get to actually gain an extra card. So typically you'll just throw away whatever card you don't think you're going to play that turn, and then to trigger Alpha Flight Station's ability, and then after that you get 2 new cards, or 1 if you're in hero, and then 2 if you're in alter ego, which will hopefully improve your hand. Spider-Woman is really good, just a pretty good stat line, having 2 thwart and 2 attack, and then the health is a bit low, but that's mitigated because, not mitigated, but Spider-Woman makes up for that because the response allows you to confuse the villain. Confuses at this point in the game are really difficult to come by, so this ability is extremely powerful. It allows Captain Marvel to flip down to get the 4 recovery, and also you get the commander card draw, which you could also give to any player. So it's important to note that if you flip down alter ego, you can give a card to any player, not just Captain Marvel. And then you also get a better version of Alpha Flight Station. Your rechannel ability is pretty good at keeping you alive, so you don't have to go to alter ego all the time because you get to spend that energy resource to heal a damage and draw a card. But it's really valuable when you can go to alter ego because of how much card draw you have and the amount of support you can give to other players with your commander action. And then over here are the aerial cards. So Cosmic Flight is a 2-cost upgrade. It just grants Captain Marvel the aerial trait, and then it has a hero interrupt defense ability. It says when Captain Marvel would take damage, discard Cosmic Flight, and prevent 3 of that damage. So then once you get aerial, all of a sudden Crisis Interdiction goes from only removing 2 threat from a scheme to removing 2 threat from the scheme, and then also removing 2 threat from a different scheme. And then Captain Marvel's helmet, instead of just giving you 1 defense, will give you +2 defense instead. And there are 2 copies of Cosmic Flight, so if you can't use it on the very first time you see it, you could see it again later. And also the ability on Cosmic Flight is pretty good because in certain situations, preventing 3 damage can change whether you win or lose the game, and that's super useful. And the aspects that I prefer on Captain Marvel are leadership and aggression. The reason I like leadership for Captain Marvel is because allies tend to be kind of expensive, and Captain Marvel can afford them extremely easily. So that allows you to play allies out of your discard pile with Make the Call, for instance, and you'll still be able to afford playing things like Lead from the Front and even a Photonic Blast and a bunch of other stuff because of how good her economy is. So I tend to prefer high economy heroes for leadership. And also in the core box, we'll go over the Vision ally later, but the Vision ally has a great synergy with energy resources, which makes a lot of sense for throwing into Captain Marvel's deck. Then the other aspect I like for her is aggression with the core box. And the reason I like aggression is, again, there's a super high economy, so you'll be able to do what Captain Marvel wants to do on top of just taking out minions with Relentless Assault and hitting the villain in the face with Uppercut. Captain Marvel can do a bunch of damage in the aggression aspect. And then the weakness of aggression is that you don't have as much access to thwarting. But since Captain Marvel has good base stats and can thwart for 2 already with her basic activation, it doesn't have to go to alter ego as often because of the rechannel ability. I find that weakness of aggression isn't particularly pronounced with Captain Marvel, so she's still pretty good at thwarting while she's in aggression, which isn't true for every hero in the core box. And now we can talk about her strengths and weaknesses. So I've already alluded to a few of these things, but I think it's good to just list them out explicitly. So her strengths, in my opinion, the first one that comes to mind is her economy. The commander action, the Alpha Flight Station, and then her energy absorption card or increase her economy a ton, and then even her attack event allows her to draw a card afterwards. She's also extremely good at surviving. The Cosmic Flight can block that damage for you, and then you also just have quite a bit of health. And then the Rechannel ability again lets you heal while you're in hero form. And she's also very good at burst damage due to Energy Channel because she can store up the damage over time. So then whenever you need that damage, like on a final push, you just have 10 damage at your disposal, which is incredibly valuable in certain situations. And she's also is more pronounced in multiplayer. Because in multiplayer, you'll get to go to Alter Ego more often because it's safer, and then the commander action can really have a massive impact in multiplayer games by helping other heroes be the best version of themselves as well, not just Captain Marvel doing well. And then the weaknesses I find with Captain Marvel is that some of her cards are just kind of lackluster. Crisis Interdiction is, when you're not aerial, it's just a 2 cost for 2 thwart, which can be useful sometimes, but it's not very good in that situation. You'd only play that like in a crisis, like the name of it says. And when you compare that to multitasking, which is a 1 cost aspect card, it does basically exactly the same thing as Crisis Interdiction. So I think this is definitely a card that is below what you'd expect of a hero card in terms of power. And then Photonic Blast, while it's really good at letting you take out minions and draw cards, I've found that only having 5 damage on the attack event when you're not playing an aggressive strategy with a bunch of extra damage from the aspect can kind of let me down sometimes. I just wish it did a little bit more damage because it can feel kind of bad when you're trying to get that big final push and you don't have more than 5 damage from your attack event. Another thing is that she can feel kind of clunky to me. The max 1 on the energy channel can be kind of frustrating when you draw like both energy channels in the same hand or something like that, and you just have to discard one or like hold on to a card forever. Or sometimes what you have to do is like spend your first energy channel while it doesn't have max counters and then play your second one, which can kind of feel bad sometimes. And then again, going into that aerial stuff, you kind of need Cosmic Flight to make the helmet and Crisis Interdiction good. Because if you don't have Cosmic Flight, they're pretty lackluster cards, like I was saying earlier. And so if you're in a situation in the beginning of the game where you really need to do something and you can't necessarily play Cosmic Flight and deal with the board state, you might miss out on just a bunch of your cards because you have 3 copies of Crisis Interdiction. And when you have 3 copies of a card that isn't that good, that can really feel bad. So if you don't get your Cosmic Flight out, what can happen is you draw all these cards with Captain Marvel, but then you don't feel like you can do much even though you have so many cards. Not to say she's weak by any means, but these are her weaknesses to me. Her strengths are definitely outweigh her weaknesses, but her weaknesses are still present. And now we can talk about Spider-Man Peter Parker. At this point in the game, there's only one Spider-Man, but in the future, I've gotten used to saying Spider-Man Peter Parker to distinguish him between the Miles Morales version. But anyways, Spider-Man has 5 hand size and 10 hit points. So this 10 hit point value is a little on the low side, maybe average. I'd have to like do the math and like average out every hero's hit points, but he doesn't feel particularly tanky based off his hit points. What does make him pretty tanky though is he has a 3 defense stat, which is really useful. And then he has 2 attack and 1 thwart. So based off his base stats, he's clearly shifted towards being good at defending and attacking and doesn't have that much from his basic thwart activation. His hero ability is the Spider Sense. It's an interrupt that says when the villain initiates an attack against you, draw 1 card. That's an extremely useful ability. You essentially have just like a 6 hand size in your hero, which means that Spider-Man has a lot of cards at his disposal. But don't forget to do that. When I first started playing Spider-Man, I forgot to trigger that ability all the time. And then in Alter Ego, you're Peter Parker with 3 recovery and 6 hand size. And then your Alter Ego ability is Scientist. It's a resource ability that says generate 1 mental resource, limit once per round. So just from the hero card, you can see that Spider-Man also has a very high economy, kind of like Captain Marvel, but it's a bit different than Captain Marvel's. He doesn't have this burst of card draw, but he has a consistently higher average economy than most heroes in the game do. Now on to his cards. So there wasn't as clear of a grouping as it was for Captain Marvel. A lot of his cards feel kind of individual. So it's starting with Swing Web Kick. This is a 3-cost attack event, pretty simple. Just says hero action, attack, deal 8 damage to an enemy. And that feels really good. The 3 for 8 has kind of become like what people expect out of a card of a hero attack event. And it's really solid. Playing Swing Web Kick and just dealing 8 damage feels amazing. It's such a simple card, but it's such a fun one as well. Aunt May is absolutely broken in my opinion. The very first deck I posted on Marvel Card Deck Builder, or maybe Card Database, I never know what to call it actually. The first deck I posted on there was a deck called Aunt May is an absolute unit, and I still think that's true. A 1-cost support, so very cheap, with the alter ego action of Exhaust Aunt May, heal 4 damage from Peter Parker. But this isn't really healing 4 damage from Peter Parker, because every time you go to alter ego, you'll be able to trigger the action, heal 4, and then before you go to hero form next turn, you can trigger the action again and heal 8. So once you have Aunt May on the board, every time Spider-Man goes to alter ego, you get 8 healing from Aunt May as a 1-cost support. That's just absolutely crazy to me. So he never has to be an alter ego for more than 1 turn when you have Aunt May. Black Cat is a really unique ally. I love this signature ally. It's a 2-cost ally with 1 thwart and 1 attack. But what's interesting about Black Cat is, well, there's a couple things, but the first thing that's interesting about Black Cat is there's no consequential damage for attacking. That means that you can just attack with Black Cat every single turn, and you won't have her disappear eventually like most allies do. So she's fantastic at helping take out minions and knock out tough status cards, and great against Ultron, which we'll talk about the villains later. And then, for some reason, I almost always forget her forced response. But her forced response says, after you play Black Cat, discard the top 2 cards of your deck. Add each card with a printed mental resource discard this way to your hand. So this can hit or miss at this point in the box. It's a little harder to craft what your actual resource balance is at this point in the game. So you can expect 1 or 0 cards most of the time that you play Black Cat. It's really, really rare that I've got two cards added to my hand from playing Black Cat. But whenever you do get a card back into your hand from playing Black Cat, it feels amazing. But if you discard Aunt May, that can feel really bad. So Black Cat is it's kind of thematic in that way, like, right? Because her whole like luck mechanic she has in the comics, she can either help you a lot or she can hurt you with that ability. But overall, she's definitely worth playing and a great card. And Backflip. This might be my favorite Spider-Man card. It's so fun to play. Specifically, what's really cool about it is when you draw into Backflip with the Spider Sensibility, and then you take a bunch of damage. So, like, I've blocked like 9, 10, like upwards of 9 or 10 damage with Backflip from a single attack, and it feels so good to do that because it's a 0-cost event that just says interrupt defense. When you would take any amount of damage from an attack, prevent all of that damage. And then the flavor text is really fun. Like, have you been training? Because that almost hit me. It just feels so Spider-Man to me. I love that card. Webbed Up is an interesting card. So on the surface, it seems really good. And it is very good, but it also has a bit of a downside. So it's a 4-cost upgrade that you can only play in hero form and you attach to an enemy. And when the attached enemy would attack, discard Webbed Up instead, then stun that enemy. So this can block not 1, but 2 attacks from the villain. And you might be thinking, like, that's amazing. Why wouldn't I want to do that? So the only reason you wouldn't necessarily want to do that with Spider-Man is that when you're blocking attacks from the villain and they don't get to initiate an attack, you don't get to trigger your Spider Sensibility. So you're also missing out on 2 cards from Webbed Up. So it's sort of a hidden cost of Webbed Up, which can make it kind of confusing on how you're supposed to use it. So this is kind of a hard part about playing Peter Parker, is you need to figure out when it's worth webbing up the villain and when it isn't worth webbing up the villain, because it's extremely expensive with a hidden cost, but the effect is absolutely massive. So you'll probably have to just play webbed up a bunch of times before you figure out when you actually like using it. And then the enhanced spider sense. So instead of just drawing you a card like the normal spider sense, this one has a different effect. It's a 1-cost event that says Hero Interrupt. When a treachery card is revealed from the encounter deck, cancel its when revealed effects. So most of the time the treachery is going to be like the villain attacks or the villain schemes or Shadow of the Past or something like that. Shadow of the Past is sort of the like signature card that I picture for cards you want to cancel in the encounter deck. And it feels really good to have an enhanced spider sense in your hand when that comes out and get to cancel it. Web Shooter is a pretty cool card. It uses 3 web counters, and then when all the web counters are gone, you discard it. As a hero resource, you can exhaust Web Shooter and remove 1 web counter from it to generate a wild resource. So this is a 1-cost card, and since the 1-cost card, you pay 1, and then you also have the Web Shooter itself leave your hand. So over the course of the Web Shooter being out, you'll gain 1 overall resource, which is pretty cool. And it can help with getting rid of those cards that say like spend like certain resources to get rid of them. The wilds are really good for that. But most of the time, I don't really spend this every turn. I usually save the Web Shooter to do something that is really impactful. So if it doesn't make that much of a difference whether I play the extra card or not, I'll often not spend the Web Shooter resource and just save it for when it's higher impact. But this is a great card. Seeing it in your opening hand and getting to pay for the Web Shooter with your Scientist resource is really fun. And it feels like you're actually Peter Parker building your Web Shooter, which I really like that. And then on to Spider Tracer, a 1-cost upgrade where you attach to a minion, and when the attached minion is defeated, you get to remove 3 threat from a scheme. So this card is, it's a mixed bag, right? Because when it works and you actually defeat the minion, and it's a 1-cost card that thwarted 3, that's really good. But the problem is if there isn't a minion out, then this card's completely useless. And then you don't get the thwarting immediately. So even if you have a minion out, you can attach it to that minion. If you can't also take out that minion, you can't thwart the turn you have it. So this card is kind of mixed on my feelings about it because I love the thematics of it, but it can be kind of rough sometimes. And now onto my aspect preferences. So the starter deck for Spider-Man is Justice. And in solo, I feel like this is almost a requirement for Spider-Man to play Justice because he has a lot of problems thwarting. And especially at this point in the game with the smaller card pool, I think that you really probably should just stick to Justice in solo. But in multiplayer, I like him in other aspects. I think he can effectively play all 4 aspects in multiplayer. But specifically, I really like the power of leadership. Sorry, not the power. I really like the leadership aspect and the protection aspect. So again, like I was saying earlier, I really like high economy heroes in leadership, and Spider-Man is a high economy hero. And for protection, you can lean into your 3 defense stat and the card that lets you ready that comes in the core box to block multiple times on the villain phase, which can be really fun. But I wouldn't really recommend playing protection in solo just because you'll have a lot of problems thwarting that way. Leadership you could play in solo. That's why I said it works in either. But I really do like Justice for him when I'm playing solo. Now on to his strength. So yeah, he is an extremely high economy hero from the Spider Sense Scientist and Web Shooter. Also extremely survivable because of Ant-Man, backflip, and having 3 defense. Great at burst damage. Having three copies of Swing Web Kick means that if you can line it up perfectly, you can do like 24 damage with just your swing web kicks in that turn, which is super fun. And then he also has quite a bit of control with his enhanced Spider Sense canceling the treacheries and the webbed up card canceling villain activations. And his weakness is really just his thwarting. It's pretty much Spider-Man's only weakness is just that he doesn't have reliable thwarting because of his 1 thwart stat and his only built-in thwarting in his kit being the Spider Tracer. Another thing is that he doesn't have all that many instances of damage in his kit, which means that he can sort of struggle to take out multiple minions, which can feel bad sometimes. He has 3 swing web kicks and Black Hat, which can be pretty good, but oftentimes, especially with those like 5, 6, 7 health minions, like with the Masters of Evil set, I find that it can be kind of hard with Spider-Man to take those out. Your swing web kick you typically want to use on the villain, but if you can't, you might have to use it to deal to just take out a minion that only has 3 health, which maybe that's the correct play in that situation. But a lot of the other heroes have better ways of taking out minions than Spider-Man does. Since his thwarting is weak, he can't really just use the aggression aspect like Captain Marvel can without having a significant weakness when you're playing solo. And that brings us to She-Hulk. So She-Hulk is the character that when I first started playing, I had the least, it kind of clicked with me the least out of all the heroes. I really struggled with her 4-hand size, but it was a lot easier playing around that 4-hand size now that I'm better at the game than when I first started. So on She-Hulk's hero side, 1 thwart, 3 attack, 2 defense. So that 3 attack stat is really high. And then the hero ability is Do You Even Lift? Response, after you change to this form, deal 2 damage to an enemy. And then in Alter Ego, you have 5 recovery, 6 hand size, and you have 15 health, just like in hero form. And the ability is I Object. When threat would be placed on a scheme, prevent 1 of that threat, limit once per round. So this is leaning into She-Hulk's dual identity of being a lawyer and also a hero. And you get bonuses for flipping down, because when you flip down, you get to prevent threat that would have gone onto the main scheme. And then when you flip back up to hero form, you get to deal 2 damage to an enemy just for having flipped up, which is pretty cool. So ideally, if She-Hulk had everything going the way she wanted, she would just be flipping constantly. And the way her cards kind of group in my head are like this. So the red box is damage, the yellow box is thwarting, and the green box is her economy. So her 1-2 punch is probably my favorite damage card she has. It says after you make a basic attack, ready She-Hulk. So when you attack for 3, you can spend 1 and ready up and attack for 3 again. And if you're playing aggression and you have the combat training and you have superhuman strength, one of those attacks are going to hit hard. So you could attack for 4, ready, and then attack for another 4. And if you have superhuman strength out, you get +2 attack for one of those attacks. And the reason it's only for 1 is because this 2-cost upgrade has a force response that says after She-Hulk attacks, discard human strength to stun the attacked enemy. So you only get to keep the 2 attack from that card for 1 attack. They did change the rules on that a bit later, to where if there's not a target for superhuman strength, you don't have to discard it. So for instance, if the villain is already stunned, you don't have to, you get to keep superhuman strength for another turn, because you can't stun the enemy twice. Or if it's a stalwart villain that you're playing against and you just can't place a stun status card on, you can keep the 2 attack around. And then ground stomp, 2-cost event that says deal 1 damage to each enemy. So this is a pretty lackluster card in solo, but in multiplayer and especially against Ultron, this card can be very good, because it just says each enemy. It doesn't have to be engaged with you or anything like that. So in any of the minion heavy scenarios in multiplayer, this can be pretty useful. This is her big finishing attack move. It's a 4-cost event. It says hero action attack, deal X damage to an enemy to a maximum of 15, where X is the amount of damage you have sustained. So one thing you might notice is that She-Hulk only has 4 hand size. So having a 4-cost card in your hand, you can't actually play it unless you have a double resource in your hand, or you have some sort of economy support out. So the things that are built into her kit to get her economy is Focused Rage, which is a 3-cost upgrade, meaning you can play it in hero form by spending your whole hand. And it says hero action, exhaust Focused Rage and take 1 damage to draw a card. So when I play She-Hulk, I really prioritize getting Focused Raged out, because it has a really good synergy with Gamma Slam. And also, the 4 hand size is really difficult to play around. Increasing your hand size from 4 to 5, in my opinion, is a lot more impactful than a hero with 5 hand size increasing their hand size to 6. Because with only 4 cards in your hand, you'll often only be able to play 1 card in a turn. But as soon as you get to 5, most of the time, you'll be able to play 2 cards. And she has 2 copies of Focused Rage. So if you can get fully set up to where you have 2 Focused Rages out, you'll get to actually have a pretty high economy, but it can just be kind of hard to get there sometimes. And then Split Personality is a 3-cost event that says action. Change your form, parentheses, flip your identity card, then draw up to your hand size, your printed hand size. So most of the time you're going to be wanting to play this while you're in hero form to flip down to alter ego and then draw more cards. You can also use it in alter ego. So for instance, you could play a cheap card while you're in alter ego and then play Split Personality. It flips you up and draws you 4 more cards. So you can sort of get extra value out of that. Split Personality can really, it's a very good card when it works out. And then in the yellow box is the thwarting. So She-Hulk thwarts in kind of a unique way. She doesn't really thwart in hero form at all. She thwarts with her Superhuman Law division, which is a 1-cost support that has an alter ego action letting you spend a mental resource to remove 2 threat from a scheme. And then her Legal Practice, which is an alter ego action, choose and discard up to 5 cards from your hand to remove 1 threat from a scheme for each card you discarded this way. So this card, I did not like this card at all when I started playing the game because it just kind of felt bad to me that I had to discard like my whole hand to thwart, whereas like all the other heroes, except for like maybe you could argue Spider-Man can't really do this that well, could like thwart without having to do that. And it still kind of feels that way to me. Like it's not a card I'm excited to see. But to give Legal Practice credit, sometimes it is the correct play to just dump your entire hand to get that 5 thwart if you really need it. And then Hellcat is normally my go-to option for thwarting with She-Hulk. It's a 3-cost ally with 2 thwart and 1 attack, and as an action you can return Hellcat to your hand. So most of the time I'll just play Hellcat, I'll thwart twice, I'll return Hellcat to my hand, I'll play Hellcat again, and I just sort of do that to mitigate She-Hulk's 1 thwart. Because if you can get Hellcat out and you can have her thwarting, and that She-Hulk's amount of damage she has is really good with just attacking and then flipping and changing forms and stuff like that. So getting Hellcat into play and not letting her go to the discard pile has been really useful for me playing her. And then my aspect preference for her is aggression, because it's thematic and it also works quite well for her. Especially on standard, you can kind of just rush down the villain and have these really short, like 4 or 5 turn games where you just hit the villain in the face over and over again, and then use the fact that you have 15 health, which is as much as each side of Rhino pretty much. And that's a pretty fun way to play her. And then I have a question mark here for the other aspects because I haven't personally, with just the core box, I'll add that disclaimer, with just the core box, I haven't personally found a way that I really enjoy playing She-Hulk in the other aspects. Justice can work, but I don't really like it that much. Leadership can work, but again, I usually like leadership on heroes with better economy. And then protection just doesn't help She-Hulk with her problem of thwarting. Whereas aggression, when you end the game before the main scheme finishes, can help you by just kind of ignoring thwarting. And also chase them down, and aggression helps She-Hulk quite a bit. So yeah, I prefer her in aggression, and She-Hulk still to this point, I don't really find myself clicking with She-Hulk even at this point after playing her and returning. I can play her and I can win on expert with her now, which I couldn't do when I first started playing, but I still don't really jive with She-Hulk that well. So maybe for the people that do feel like they understand She-Hulk better, you could maybe tell me in the chat or in the comment section which aspects you would like other than aggression and like how you would make that aggression feel fun and also work. I'd be interested to hear that. And then on to her strengths and weaknesses. So rushing is very viable on She-Hulk with the Do You Even Lift ability and the 3 attack and the 1-2 punch. You can sort of just keep dishing out the damage, and especially on standard, this is very good. And in multiplayer, she's extremely powerful in multiplayer, in my opinion, because her flipping strategy is quite good. It increases her economy by allowing her to get that 6 hand size, and then it's not as dangerous because you aren't going to lose the main scheme as easily when you're in multiplayer. And then you can keep getting that 2 damage every time you flip up. And it's very good. I do enjoy playing her quite a bit in multiplayer, just not so much in solo. And then her survivability, the 15 health and 5 recovery cannot be ignored. 15 health is crazy. Uh, it's again as much as a side of a villain, and then you get 5 recovery. So if you need to, you can flip down and heal 10. So she's very hard to take out. And then the weaknesses I found with her is that she can feel kind of unreliable. The biggest thing that makes me sad is the Gamma Slam, because it's so fun when it works out and very powerful when it works out. But unfortunately, there's only one copy of it. So multiple times when playing her throughout my gameplays with her, I would draw Gamma Slam in my first hand, which just felt so bad because Gamma Slam on turn 1 isn't good because you haven't sustained that much damage yet. So it's like, it's just a completely dead card in your first hand. And then you don't get to see it until you go all the way through your deck again. And that can feel really bad. So getting Gamma Slam to actually, to actually work correctly in the way it's intended is kind of rare for me, at least. And then the 4 hand size, it not only lowers your economy, but only having 4 cards in your hand also lowers the amount of options you have. So let's say like you're playing aggression and there's a minion out and relentless assault would be perfect. Well, you're just less likely to see that card that you need because you have less cards. And then for low economy, yeah, there's just the 4 hand size again. Comes up multiple times here because it's just a huge weakness in my opinion. And then her low thwart. So she only has 1 thwart, and then the only way she can really thwart effectively is by being an alter ego. But the villain schemes when you go to alter ego, so it doesn't really balance out in my opinion. You'll very frequently flip down and then just lose the main scheme with She-Hulk. So most of the time you play She-Hulk, you're going to lose to threat, not damage. And now we can move on to Iron Man. So Iron Man is another hero that I did not synergize with when I started playing. I didn't enjoy playing him. I found his whole thing frustrating. But now, coming back to the core box, I like Iron Man a lot more. I don't really know what happened, but Iron Man is one of my favorite heroes at this point, whereas before he was debatably my least favorite hero. So I'm so glad I came back to Iron Man. But now let's go over him. So Iron Man has 2 thwart, 1 attack, and 1 defense. And then if you just look at his hand size, it says 1. And you heard how much I complained about She-Hulk's 4 hand size. But luckily he has an ability that says you get +1 hand size for each tech upgrade you control to a maximum hand size of 7. So at the end of the game, Iron Man has the largest hand size in the game. So the only other character even up to this point that I can think about that can reach that 7 hand size just kind of innately is Magic. And that's, again, only with the Sorcerer Supreme upgrade. So still, Iron Man has like the largest hand size in the game once you have his suit. And then his alter ego ability has 3 recovery. He has 9 health, so low health because he's just like a dude, you know. But his alter ego is all about getting your suit built. So when you're an alter ego and you're playing Tony Stark, you're building your suit. And you're doing that with the futurist action. It lets you look at the top 3 cards of your deck, add 1 to your hand, and discard the others. So this essentially just means you'll be able to quickly go through your deck on the first pass through the deck, find your suit as quick as you can, and then flip up. And this is sort of how his cards group in my head of all of the stuff in green is just how you get the suit built. It's either parts of the suit or things that help you get the suit built. And then the red is damage. And then unfortunately, I just rarely play War Machine, so War Machine didn't make it into one of the boxes here. But let's start with talking about his suit. So the arc reactor, I think, is his most important one. Getting that ready is extremely powerful. It lets you get 4 thwart or 6 if you're playing Justice and have the Heroic Intuition card in every turn. So very consistent output, and it also, when you do need to recover, it allows you to thwart, ready up with the arc reactor, flip down, and then recover, which is extremely powerful, extremely versatile. The powered gauntlets let you exhaust it to deal 1 damage to an enemy, and then 2 damage instead if you have the aerial trait. and that's pretty good. He has 2 copies of this, so once you have these powered gauntlets out, you'll just be like chipping away, doing chip damage to all the minions and villains. It really feels like you're flying over the battlefield and just sort of like hitting everything from below and like doing a bunch of stuff with the gauntlets, which is super fun. The rocket boots are actually how you actually become aerial. It's a 1-cost upgrade. It says hero action, exhaust rocket boots and spend a mental resource, gain the aerial trait until the end of the round. So there is a cost here of having to spend that mental to become aerial, but it does improve your arc reactor, your powered gauntlets, and then also your helmet, which says that you can exhaust it to remove 1 threat from a scheme, and then if you're aerial, you get to remove 1 threat from each scheme instead. So in multiplayer, the helmet is amazing because when there's a bunch of side schemes out, just getting to remove 1 threat from all those is extremely impactful. In solo, you might find that this card isn't as important as the other ones, but definitely in multiplayer, it's absolutely amazing. And then his last one is just the Mark V armor. It's a 3-cost upgrade that just gives you 6 hit points. And so he has 2 copies of rocket boots, 1 copy of Mark V armor, meaning that you can get +2 from the rocket boots, from 1 from each copy, and then +6 from the Mark V armor, bringing you to +8, bringing Iron Man all the way up to 17 hit points, which is crazy. Like that's so much. So once Iron Man actually has all the parts of his suit, he is one of the tankiest characters in the entire game. Stark Tower and Pepper Potts are both supports that help Iron Man get set up. So the Stark Tower is very explicit in that. It's a 2-cost support. It says alter ego action, exhaust Stark Tower, choose a player. That player returns the topmost tech upgrade in their discard pile to their hand. So you might have to use a tech upgrade as a resource to play another tech upgrade. Or maybe with your futurist action, you saw 2 tech upgrades instead of just 1, so then you're forced to discard 1. The Stark Tower will help you recover those. And then once you've selfishly built your suit, it's still useful in the sense that other characters have tech upgrades. The first one that comes to mind is Spider-Man with his Spider Tracer. And I believe his web shooter is also a tech upgrade. So like the Stark Tower says to just choose a player, so you can actually choose Spider-Man to then return his tech upgrade to his hand, which can be very good in multiplayer. Pepper Potts is one of my favorite supports in the game. It's a 3-cost support that has a resource, says exhaust Pepper Potts, generate the resources of the top card in your discard pile. Worst case scenario is just generating 1 resource, but the way you want to use Pepper Potts is when you have a double resource in your hand, you spend the double resource, make sure that you put the double on top of your discard pile, and then Pepper Potts can generate another double resource. So when you get Pepper Potts generating those double resources, you just have so much power in that to play multiple cards in the same turn. And now moving on to his damage cards. So Supersonic Punch is a super simple card. It just says deal 4 damage to an enemy, but if you have the aerial trait, it's 8 damage. So it's as much damage when you're aerial as Spider-Man's Swing Web Kick, but at 1 less cost. And then Repulsor Blast is a really cool card. It's a 1-cost event that says hero action attack, deal 1 damage to an enemy, and discard the top 5 cards of your deck. For each printed energy resource discarded this way, deal 2 additional damage to that enemy. So best case scenario, you're dealing 1 damage to an enemy, and then if all of them are energy resources, you can deal 10 to the enemy. Also, it's just for each printed energy resource. So if you discard the energy double resource, you could get all the way up to 13 damage with this card, which is crazy. I don't think I've ever got a 13 damage Repulsor Blast, but I frequently get like a 7 to 10 damage roughly out of my Repulsor Blast. Sorry, you can't actually get 10. You can get like 7 to 9 is most of the time what's going to come up, as because it's the 1 damage plus those 2 additional, so it'll just go up in increments of 2, so it'll be odd numbers every time. And then War Machine is a 4-cost ally, which is very expensive. 1 thwart, 2 attack, 4 health, so the 4 health stat's pretty nice. As an action, you get to exhaust War Machine and deal 2 damage to him to deal 1 damage to each enemy. So War Machine is not like a horrible ally. His 4 health allows him to get off like 6 damage and then block. Or if you're against Ultron, you might use War Machine to just wipe out the board of minions, which can be really good. But outside of the Ultron scenario, War Machine just doesn't really feel worth it to me most of the time, and I don't often play War Machine. I end up using him as the wild resource printed on War Machine to go aerial most of the time. Now, on my aspect preferences. So in solo, I really like the power of leadership. And the reason I like the power of leadership is because while you're setting up your suit, you need to find a way to thwart. And having allies is a really good way to do that. And again, also extremely high economy hero, which I really like with leadership. And it's really thematic that Iron Man would be leadership because he's like the leader of the Avengers. And then you can play that in solo or multiplayer, but I really prefer multiplayer to play justice or aggression. Most of the time justice though, because you can get the heroic intuition, put that on the Iron Man, and then with the arc reactor, you're thwarting 6 every turn. That's just so good to me. And then for strengths, again, Iron Man extremely high economy with Pepper Potts, the 7 hand size, and Futurist. And then in the late game, he is the most powerful hero. I don't want to say he's the most powerful hero like in the entire game, but yeah, because that's just a lot of stuff to go through. But my progression series will eventually figure that out. But currently, with just these heroes, he is definitely the most powerful hero once he's set up. And then he's great at burst damage. It's really easy to do 30 or more damage with Iron Man when you're fully set up with Repulsor Blast and Supersonic Punch and all your upgrades and your readies. I consistently do over 30 damage with Iron Man. And then he has extremely reliable thwarting with the Arc Reactor and the Mark V helmet. His weaknesses are just that he requires setup. Because starting off with 1 hand size, if you flip up to hero form on the first turn with only one hand size, the game's pretty much just over at that point. You really need to stay in Alter Ego and get a couple tech upgrades before you flip up. And then also because of that, you can get unlucky when you're playing Iron Man. So the order that you draw your cards does change the outcome of the game when you're playing Iron Man. Later on, there's going to be more ways to mitigate that. But when you just have the core box, you can just get unlucky and lose in solo when you're playing Iron Man. So he's much, much better in multiplayer than he is in solo. Because in multiplayer, you'll get to have that extra threshold on the main scheme. And then also your teammates can kind of just carry Tony Stark through the beginning of the game while he's setting up his suit. And then once he flips up, you'll be super powerful. And then you can just, take all the credit and ignore that you were in Alter Ego for the first 4 turns. But yeah, I really, really, really like Iron Man now. Very difficult to play. I probably could have added that as one of his weaknesses for like new players is like starting off with Iron Man can be really, really rough because he does have this whole mini game and it's not easy to build this suit and then also deal with stuff that the villain's doing, and especially in solo. And now we can move on to Black Panther. So Black Panther is sort of an interesting case for me because when I first started playing, I thought Black Panther was really cool, but I was like, but all I'm really doing is playing Wakanda Forever, and that wasn't that interesting to me. And then I moved on, but I think I was just wrong back then. Like my opinion, I never thought bad of Black Panther. It's just I never really wanted to play him. And then when I returned to Black Panther, going through the core box again, I really enjoyed playing him. The sequencing of, well, it is true that pretty much all you're doing is playing upgrades and then Wakanda Forever. The sequencing that you get to choose is really, really fun and it's fun, impactful, and is not the same. It changes a lot based off what villain you're playing. So Black Panther has an amazing stat line: 2 thwart, 2 attack, 2 defense, with Retaliate 1 as his hero ability. So this is just a lot of base power. On top of that, he has 11 health, which is, between Peter Parker and Captain Marvel. So he's a little bit tankier not tankier. He has a little bit more health than Peter Parker does. And then in Alter Ego, he has 4 recovery, 6 hand size, and then has the setup ability to search your deck for a Black Panther upgrade and add it to your hand. So you'll always get to start with playing 1 upgrade, which is really vital, because if you didn't get that, it would be kind of similar to Iron Man, where it's just really difficult to set up your suit. But you'll always start with one, and then there's 5 copies of Wakanda Forever. And as soon as you get one upgrade out, Wakanda Forever is worth it, in my opinion, at one cost. And then here's how I group his cards in my head. When I think of Black Panther, I think of this purple box as these are the cards I use to play Wakanda Forever and my suit and get set up. And then the green is just economy. So let's start by just going over his upgrades. So energy deck, or sorry, we have to do Wakanda Forever first. Wakanda Forever is a hero action that says resolve the special ability of each Black Panther upgrade you control in any order. And then each of the upgrades has an ability and then a bonus if it's the last one you triggered. So Energy Daggers says special, choose a player, deal 1 damage to the villain and to each enemy engaged with that player. And then if it's the final step in the sequence, you get to deal 2 damage instead, which is crazy, right? Because Ultron is the big boss of this box, and Energy Daggers can just wipe out all the drones engaged with a player, even if the upgraded drones are out, which is so powerful. And then also the retaliate against Ultron is really good because the drones just like one-shot themselves when they hit Black Panther. And then the next one is Panther Claws. Special attack, deal 2 damage to an enemy, and then 4 instead if this is the last step of the sequence. So the 4 damage can feel pretty good, and if you need one of the other ones, it'll just be 2 damage. And then Tactical Genius says special, remove 1 threat from a scheme, and then 2 instead if this is the final step of the sequence. And then the Vibranium Suit is special attack, move 1 damage from your hero to an enemy, 2 damage instead if this is the final step of the sequence. So this Vibranium Suit is my go-to for Black Panther. It's my favorite one to get out first, because once you have the Vibranium Suit out, when it's the last step of the sequence, you can move 2 damage from your hero to the villain, meaning you're essentially healing 2 and dealing 2 damage every time you trigger this, which can just keep you alive really well. Shuri is the signature ally, 2 cost with 3 health, and then 1 thwart and 1 attack. With a response that says after Shuri enters play, search your deck for an upgrade and add it to your hand, shuffle your deck. So most of the time, you're probably going to play Shuri to get a Black Panther upgrade, but it is worth noting that it's just an upgrade. It doesn't have to be a Black Panther upgrade that you add to your hand with Shuri. And Ancestral Knowledge is an alter ego action that says choose up to 3 different cards in your discard pile and shuffle them into your deck. So most of the time, I'm going to be grabbing Wakanda Forever, a powerful card like Nick Fury, and then whatever else I need at that time. So it's really useful when you do go to Alter Ego to play Ancestral Knowledge and then get cards that you want back into your deck. The other benefit of going into Alter Ego is the Golden City, which is the 2-cost support that as an Alter Ego action, you can exhaust it to just draw 2 cards. And when you get the Golden City out early, especially, it's amazing how much cards you have. And then Vibranium is also a really cool card. There's multiple copies of it. It's a double wild resource, which just having extra doubles in your deck is really good. And the fact that they're both wilds means that all those villain attachments that say like spend energy and a physical and a mental resource to get rid of them, it's super easy to do when you have Vibranium. And then my aspect preferences. So with Black Panther, he's the only hero in the core box where I feel like in both solo and multiplayer, you can have a viable build in every single aspect. He's just so versatile with what he does between his base stats and the Wakanda Forevers that you can just add whatever else you want into his deck and it totally works. So his precon deck comes with protection, which is good because with the med teams and Vibranium Suit and Luke Cage's tough status card and all that stuff, you can just stay alive forever. And then aggression's really good because Black Panther can thwart inherently, and then he can just take out all the minions and then play chase them down, which is a great synergy. And then power of leadership is good because he has a super high economy. The leadership aspect is good because he has a super high economy, meaning you can afford all those allies really easily. And then justice is really good because he has enough economy to play whatever cards he wants pretty much. And then he can thwart and then flip down to Alter Ego, draw 2 cards at the Golden City. Really good. So every single aspect is viable on Black Panther from the core set onwards, which I think is really cool. And for his strengths and weaknesses, he has really high economy with Vibranium Golden City, very survivable with his full recovery and his Vibranium suit, super versatile with Wakanda Forever and getting to choose what final step of the sequence you need in that situation. And his base stats are amazing, especially with the Retaliate. The weaknesses I see for Black Panther are that he doesn't really have an alter ego ability. You get a setup ability where you get to search for a Black Panther upgrade and add it to your hand. But then after that first turn, if you don't, especially if you don't have the Golden City out, he essentially doesn't have any benefit to going to alter ego, which all of the other heroes do. So that's definitely his biggest weakness to me. Another thing is that sometimes the Wakanda Forever timing can be awkward, especially on the first deck pass when you might not have as many upgrades that you want, or you want to prioritize playing upgrades, or if you're like looking for a final push and then you just don't have them. But it's not all that awkward to me, because I think this is a mistake I was making when I first started playing Black Panther. Was I thought I had it in my head that like I need to play all my upgrades and then start playing Wakanda Forever's, where really that's not the case. As soon as you have one upgrade, it's totally worth it. So like if you imagine you have Vibranium Suit out, which is normally the one I go for, starting from turn 1, you have Wakanda Forever becomes a 1-cost card that can heal 2 damage from your hero and deal 2 damage to the villain or an enemy, which is just really good already. So you don't need to feel like you can't play Wakanda Forever on the first turn. Or maybe not. But it is worth noting that it sometimes is awkward in my experience, with especially how many resources Black Panther has available to him and how cheap all of his cards are once that comes out. So like sometimes you'll end up with like a bunch of double resources in your hand, one Wakanda Forever, and then like not much else to do. Like later on, there will be tools to deal with that, but currently, sometimes his hands can be awkward. And now on to my preference. So you might have been able to guess this based off just what I was saying. So I want to define what I'm talking about for this tier list. So I'm only considering cards released up to this point, which in this case, since it's the first review in my progression series, it's just the core box. And then this is based only on how much fun I have when I'm playing them. It's not anything else. It's just how much I enjoy playing them. And then another thing is it's just my opinion based on how many plays I have with the core box. I played all these heroes a lot so that I could inform my opinion, but at the end of it, it's just an opinion, and it's okay if you disagree with me on this. And since there are only 5 characters at this point, I just assigned each character to a tier because I have 5 tiers here. So the actual tier that these characters are in currently doesn't really matter at this point. Once more heroes and I actually are come out and I have like 20 or more heroes, then the tiers can start actually meaning something. But currently, it doesn't really mean anything. And then another note is that Iron Man, Captain Marvel, and Spider-Man were all really close to me. So it's like it was really difficult for me to like order them because I really like all those heroes. So my favorite hero in the core box is Black Panther. And it's just because I love sequencing the Wakanda Forever, and the Vibranium resource card is just super fun to me. A great time every time I play him. And for Iron Man, building the suit is just really thematic and really fun. Like I really like the feeling of I'm playing Tony Stark at the beginning. I'm not Iron Man yet, and then I have to build my suit like in a cave with a box of scraps. Like that's kind of how it feels. And then once you actually get your suit built, the payoff is totally worth it, and it's super fun. Pepper Potts is a standout card to me, and Repulsor Blast is a extremely fun attack event. Captain Marvel, the things I like about her are storing energy resources on Energy Channel. I really like that. And then Alpha Flight Station and is a really cool support that I have a lot of fun using. And the Energy Absorption resource card is just it feels so good drawing into a triple resource. And for Spider-Man, again, just because he's in C tier right now doesn't mean I dislike him. He's in fact, I love playing Spider-Man Peter Parker. It's just he's just assigned to C tier right now just because there's only 5 characters in the game. And then the only reason he's here is just because with this current card pool, I like playing Captain Marvel and Iron Man and Black Panther more, but I don't dislike playing him. It's just once the more Spider-Man themed villains come out, and there's all this like web warrior stuff, and he can make use of his high economy more, I think he gets a lot more fun to play. By no means is he bad. Super great hero, but yeah, I like the other ones a bit more. And then She-Hulk, while I don't like dislike playing her, she does. I'm not looking forward to playing her over the other heroes. She just still at this point doesn't feel like I can really get my playstyle to fit with her that well. And while I enjoy the flipping strategy, it's just the other heroes are more fun for me. And it's just also really, really sad every time the Gamma Slam doesn't work because I really want the Gamma Slam to work. And it just often doesn't work for me. And now that we've talked about all the heroes, we can talk about the villains. All of the villains in the core box, I think, have aged extremely well. Rhino is still a great intro scenario, and he's still interesting as you go forward, especially if you use different modular sets. Klaw has a lot going on for him. Still difficult, not a pushover, has a bunch of interesting mechanics, and specifically with boost effects, different modulars can affect Klaw a lot. And then Ultron, it's still, again, a very difficult boss to fight. You can kind of try to counter him, but if you don't just fully counter him, he is extremely difficult. One of the most difficult villains in the game, I think, if you don't try to deck build to counter him. So he's like a deck building puzzle to me. But even when you build a deck that's good against him, still Ultron can get out of control. And I think all three of these villains have very interesting mechanics behind them as well. And let's go into each of them. When I think of Rhino, these are kind of the key cards that I think about. He has his villain card, obviously, but then the card that seems most signature to Rhino is Charge. Charge says when Rhino attacks, the attack gains overkill. At the end of this attack, discard Charge. So basically, Rhino is going to get a very big attack on him, and this can also stack. This brings up, like, you see Spider-Man on top of Rhino like that. I had such a cool experience when I played Rhino. I think this is actually on my channel as well, where Rhino had two copies of Charge attacks. So he had Charge attached. So he had +6 attack, and he attacked me for like 11. And my Spider Sense drew into backflip, and I got to backflip that damage, and that was so fun. But yeah, and if you're not playing Spider-Man, you can't just like backflip. Rhino can still be kind of difficult when he gets those charges out. It's something that you have to be careful about. The most difficult thing about Rhino, though, is definitely his main scheme in solo, because at 7 per player, flipping down and getting an advance just can end the game randomly, which is not my favorite thing, but it's more of just a solo issue. Outside of solo, the main scheme feels fine. And then Breakin' and Taken is going to come out every time you go to Rhino 2. So every single time, whether it's standard or expert, you will see the side scheme, which is just a classic hazard icon. And these are kind of the cards you have to prepare for when you're thinking about playing against Rhino. And then for Klaw, his whole thing is that he's going to give you a lot of minions and a lot of side schemes, and he's just going to stall. And he doesn't really attack for all that much, because you can see on his first side he has 0 attack, and I think it goes to 1 and then 2 attack, so his printed attack isn't that much. But he does get 1 additional boost card for his activations, and he does have a couple triple boosts. So sometimes when you choose to block Klaw, he might attack you for 0, and then other times if you choose like not to attack Klaw, he might attack you for 6. So it's like this like interesting little game that goes on with him, to where you don't really know at all how much he's going to attack you for. So you have to kind of play around that. At the beginning of the game, you'll get a minion, and hopefully the ones that come in his set are the Armored Guard and Weapons Runner, which are both kind of like these grunts that just get in the way. So Weapons Runner gains Surge, you get another encounter card, and the Armored Guard has Toughness and Guard, which can be, it just slows you down. And then also to slow you down, he has all these side schemes. So the defense network starts in play, and it just has a crisis icon, so you kind of have to get through the defense network to then start thwarting his scheme. And then that kind of just, again, gives you an extra barrier you have before you can start chipping away at his health. And then when you reveal side 2 of Klaw, the Immortal Claw comes out, giving him +10 hit points and an acceleration icon that you probably have to deal with, because you have to also get through those +10 hit points. And the recommended modular set for him is the Masters of Evil, which I think is actually an incredibly difficult modular set. Most of the time that I lose to Klaw, it doesn't really feel like I'm losing to like Klaw per se. It's the Masters of Evil because this side scheme is brutal. So it has an acceleration icon and 3 per player threat, which is like a standard side scheme. And then it says when revealed, discard cards from the counter deck until a Masters of Evil minion is discarded. Put that minion into play, engage with the first player. So there's a bunch of difficult minions in there. And also there's a treachery that brings another minion out. And his main scheme can also bring a Masters of Evil minion out because they're shuffled into the deck. And the games where you get a Masters of Evil minion, Klaw is extremely difficult, especially on expert mode. Like if you get Radioactive Man as the main schemes thing, it's a completely different game than if you get Weapons Runner. So if you find yourself struggling to defeat Klaw, I think you should consider swapping the Masters of Evil set with Bomb Scare. I think that would make for a much less swingy experience, and it would be really fun, especially if you're new to the game and you're like just getting comfortable with things. Switching this mod set out would be fun, and also it would get you in the habit of switching mod sets, which I'm going to talk about that a little more later. But that's something I wish I would have done a lot more when I started playing. And then Ultron. So Ultron 2 is sort of the classic for me because Ultron 2 will be there both in standard and expert and has a forced interrupt. When Ultron attacks you, put the top card of your deck into play, face down engaged with you as a drone minion. Until the end of this attack, Ultron gets +1 attack for each drone minion engaged with you. So Ultron's going to give you a drone every time, and then he'll get +1 attack for all the drones. And on top of that, the main scheme brings out drones. So on a forced response on the second main scheme, after placing threat here during step 1 of the villain phase, each player must choose to either place 2 threat here or get another drone minion. So he's going to have like +2 attack, bringing up to 4, plus the boost, and it's a lot of drone minions. If you've played Ultron, you know that the drone minions can get out of control very quickly. And their stats come from the Ultron drone's environment. Basically 1 attack, 1 scheme, 1 hit points. And then a lot of times upgraded drones comes out, which is extremely difficult to deal with, especially if you're not playing a hero that can deal with drones well, or a hero that can't easily meet the requirement to spend 1 of each resource type. Because this one gives each drone +1 attack and +1 hit point, which is so much harder than when they have 1 attack and 1 hit point. Because suddenly you can't just ping them off as easily, and they actually hit you quite hard. So Ultron is all about finding a way to deal with this swarm of minions that comes out. And then the modular sets also come in, which supplement all these villains. So Bomb Scare is recommended with Rhino. It's pretty standard, just a couple side schemes, some minions. Really, it's not... I wouldn't say it's like super easy. Like it is easy as far as modular sets go, but it's not like if you add in Bomb Scare, you don't have anything to deal with. I think this is actually a super fun mod set. And again, like I said, playing this with Klaw and Ultron, I think could really make those villains more manageable for you. The Masters of Evil, super difficult. I really like the theming of it though. It feels like you're fighting like comic book villains to me. Like it just feels straight out of a comic book. Under Attack is the one that's recommended with Ultron. And Under Attack is harder in some ways than Master of Evil, but I find myself losing to Under Attack less than Masters of Evil. The thing about Under Attack that can be difficult is the Crisis icon. When you just really can't handle a Crisis icon, you can see that one card has a triple boost as well, which can be rough. And also the one that deals damage to all the characters you control. So if you're planning on blocking with allies, Under Attack can punish you a lot. And then there's also 2 more modular sets that came with the core box that I didn't really explore until much later, and I wish I had played more with them. So both of them are these sort of mini boss modular sets, where MODOK, you can see 8 health, 2 attack, 2 scheme, with Retaliate 2. That is brutal to deal with. And then the side scheme, he has 2 side schemes that will both search him out, and they have acceleration icons, and he also has upgrades attached to him that will cause him to revive. So if you get MODOK with the upgrade where he revives, that's brutal because then you have to get through 16 health, and he has Retaliate too, so you're going to take so much damage for going through that. It's very difficult. One strategy for the MODOK modular set that I usually use is the side scheme. I don't think is worth it to finish it in a lot of cases because it's just an acceleration icon and it's so bad when it gets revealed and searches out MODOK that I most of the time just leave it on the table and then just deal with having to thwart more. Because if you take out those modular sets, or sorry, the side schemes, and they shuffle back into the deck and then come out and bring MODOK out again, it'll be so crushing because MODOK is very difficult. And Madam Hydra, a similar thing, like this minion that just keeps coming back and has this interaction with the side scheme. Very difficult modular set. So these two mini boss modular sets, I think, are very difficult, like very difficult, and can add a lot of flavor to the other scenarios. So during this progression series, one of the scenarios I did was Klaw in two-handed. So I was playing She-Hulk and Captain Marvel, and I used both the MODOK and the Legions of Hydra modular set in Klaw. So he was searching out these like really strong minions. I was actually able to win that scenario on expert mode, which was really fun. Like I had a lot of fun with that scenario, and it was extremely difficult, but also very fun. So if you're looking for a challenge, consider these modular sets, and also if you feel like you can handle expert mode, but you want to just change it up, consider trying out like the standard villains, but with these difficult modular sets. I think that will give you a lot of replayability, and it's super fun. And I really wish that when I had started playing the core box, that I had done more of this, of swapping around the modular sets. And now the first tier list. So this is, again, I want to go over the criteria here. So this is for standard difficulty, and I have it split between solo and multiplayer. So I'm only considering cards that are released up to this point, which is just the core box. It's based on my experience from playing them over and over and over again. And again, it's just my opinion. So this isn't a fact when I say that. It's just my experience and my opinion. And there are only 3 villains at this point. So again, the tiers here aren't super meaningful at this point. The actual tier will start mattering more later in the progression series. And for the difficulty here, I'm not considering just purposefully trying to counter the villain. I'm picturing like you go in, you pick your hero, you use one of the precon decks, and then you go in and try to take them out. So in solo, Ultron, I think it does follow the trend of Rhino and then Klaw and then Ultron in difficulty, but I don't think they're like super spread out. And then what happens is when you go to multiplayer, in my experience, Ultron can actually become very difficult in multiplayer because there's certain ways that you can deal with all the drones and certain heroes that can deal with the drones better. And like Iron Man and Black Panther are very good at dealing with the drone minions. But if you're not playing Iron Man and Black Panther and you're playing against Ultron in multiplayer, it can just be completely overwhelming having that many drones in multiplayer. So I think that multiplayer Ultron in a lot of cases is actually harder than solo Ultron. And then in multiplayer, it's also notable that Klaw and Rhino get a lot easier. Klaw and Rhino are much more difficult in solo. So Klaw is because he gets minions out and has a low threshold on his main scheme. So then when he finishes one, he'll bring out another minion. So you can kind of get overwhelmed by Klaw. And then for Rhino, it's just the thing of when you go down to Alter Ego, he can just win the game off that. But that problem with Rhino is mitigated when you're in multiplayer. So solo, I think they're all kind of closer together, but Ultron's definitely hardest, and it follows that same order, but I think Ultron just gets harder in a lot of cases, whereas Klaw and Rhino just get easier. Now moving on to Expert. So this is quite a bit different. So I have Rhino up higher than he was before, and I have both Klaw and Ultron in the same tier for solo. This is because Ultron feels like a more fair matchup to me. I have lost, like my most brutal losses playing were actually against Expert Klaw, not against Expert Ultron, because Ultron tends to just overwhelm you over time, whereas Klaw, again, if you get that variance of having the really strong Masters of Evil minion that comes out, you can just get overwhelmed, and he starts with that extra side scheme, and things can get out of hand very quickly. So I've been completely annihilated by Klaw, depending on the situation and depending on the hero, because certain heroes do better. better against both of these villains. So if you're playing like Iron Man, for instance, Ultron is going to be an easier matchup than Klaw, which is not the case. Because so if you're playing like Peter Parker, Klaw is going to be an easier matchup than Ultron. So there's that. And then in multiplayer, again, I think Ultron still stays very difficult in multiplayer, especially on expert mode. The last stage of Ultron has so much health in expert. But then Klaw and Rhino both get significantly easier in multiplayer because the minions that Klaw brings out, he doesn't bring out like one per player at the start. He just brings out one. So in multiplayer, there's more people to deal with it, and then Klaw isn't actually putting out nearly as much pressure in multiplayer. And now we can talk about the matchups. So I'm starting with Rhino on expert mode. And the reason I'm choosing expert mode for this matchup tier list is because I feel like on standard, as you play the game more, all the heroes should be able to beat all of the villains pretty reliably. Like once you like deck build and stuff and you get more used to the game and you get used to what the villains are going to do. So the difficulty I think will come in expert mode where some of the heroes can get outpaced by some of the villains at this point in the game. So in solo against Rhino, I think Spider-Man is actually extremely good against Rhino because of that backflip interaction. So Spider-Man can just hold on to his backflips and then use the justice aspect to finish the side scheme that comes out. And Spider-Man has such good defense that he doesn't have to go to alter ego, meaning that Rhino's main threat of his main scheme not his main threat. His main threat is his damage, which Spider-Man can mitigate. And then he doesn't have to go to alter ego, which kind of brings out the unfair side of Rhino's matchup in solo. So Spider-Man is fantastic against Rhino for expert and also thematic, which I think is super fun. So I definitely recommend Spider-Man if you're trying to be expert Rhino. And then in the A tier, I have Captain Marvel and Black Panther for solo because they're both just really solid heroes. They're both tanky enough to where they aren't going to struggle too hard, so they won't have to flip down as many turns. And they have a lot of versatility. And again, like Captain Marvel can just like burst down the last stage of Rhino, and then Black Panther can just keep healing up with his vibranium armor, and he can search that out at the beginning. So both of them, I think, do well against expert Rhino as well. And then She-Hulk, she can beat expert Rhino, and I've beat expert Rhino with She-Hulk, but it's just not as easy. It wasn't nearly as easy for me as it was with those other three heroes. So I just have her lower because again, Rhino's thing is his thwart, so it can be kind of rough, especially if you get the crisis icons out and you can't thwart the main scheme down. She-Hulk can struggle in hero form, and if you flip down where your thwarting actually is, it can also be very difficult. And then Iron Man I have in last place for Rhino because not that he can't beat Rhino, because again, Rhino is an easier villain than Ultron is, based off those other lists I was showing earlier. It's just that even though Iron Man can beat Rhino, just like all of these heroes can beat Rhino pretty reliably, it's just not a good matchup for him because of how low the main scheme is. So like if you can picture it that if you don't get your suit, let's say you only get one upgrade on turn one, you flip up because you don't want to lose the main scheme, because if Rhino schemes twice, you can just lose the game off that. And then Rhino hits you. You only have 9 health at that point, and then you have to flip back down. It can be very rough. It's like very dependent on what cards you draw, and it will be kind of random in a sense whether you're going to win or lose in solo. But then in multiplayer, all of Rhino's problems get like kind of mitigated a bit because his main scheme isn't as scary. And then also the hero's powers do change, in my opinion, when you go to multiplayer. So you see Iron Man jumps all the way up from D tier to S tier because Iron Man is just that much stronger in multiplayer, especially when someone can like kind of baby Iron Man while he's building his suit. As soon as his suit's built, the game's over pretty much. Because like if Iron Man has health and he has his full suit and he hasn't lost yet, he's probably just going to win. Spider-Man I still think is really great in multiplayer because he can also do a protection build in multiplayer and then defend other people from Rhino's big attacks. And also his swing web kick is pretty good against Rhino because Rhino doesn't actually have that much health. And then Captain Marvel and Black Panther, I just have them staying the same because they don't have any like particularly difficult things to deal with Rhino and don't have any particular weaknesses against Rhino. And then I moved She-Hulk up because, again, She-Hulk is a hero that I think gets better as you play in multiplayer similar to Iron Man. It's not as extreme as Iron Man, but she does get significantly better in multiplayer because she can make use of her flipping strategy. And now we can talk about Klaw. And we've gone over what's difficult about Klaw. And I have Black Panther as the best matchup here against Klaw. Because with Klaw, you need to be able to do damage in multiple instances because you have to take out a bunch of different minions at the same time as thwarting. And Black Panther is fantastic at multitasking. So he can deal with Klaw's minions and his side schemes pretty well. And he doesn't have to go to Alter Ego that often. His Retaliate will help a lot against the Armored Guard, for instance, knocking off the Tough status card, and also just chip the minions down. It's like when I played against Klaw, I used the Aggression Precon deck with Black Panther, and I was kind of expecting to lose, honestly, but I won, and I did not get particularly lucky, and I won without that much difficulty with Black Panther and solo on Expert, so I have Black Panther up here. Captain Marvel, in my experience playing, it was kind of difficult beating Klaw, even though I had my board fully set up, and Captain Marvel is a strong hero. It was just really difficult to keep up with the amount of annoyances Klaw was throwing at her. She just didn't quite have the output to comfortably deal with that many minions and side schemes that he was throwing out. So she definitely was not as good at beating Klaw as Black Panther was in my experience. Then I have Spider-Man, which when I played against Expert Klaw in solo with Spider-Man, I lost, and then I switched to Justice, and then I won, and it wasn't that big of a deal. Because Spider-Man can survive his attacks, and he can just swing web kick those big minions, so it's not a horrible matchup for him. It's just the hard thing for Spider-Man is doing that while also thwarting the side schemes, which just is not very doable unless you have the Justice aspect. So that's why I don't have him very high on here, is because he really gets forced into Justice against Klaw. And then She-Hulk is a little lower, just again because she struggles to deal with that many side schemes. And then Iron Man's at the very bottom because Klaw is a super high tempo scenario. He starts with on Expert with Crisis, an acceleration icon, a minion. So if you don't flip up, you're probably just going to lose. And if you do flip up, you're just going to take a bunch of damage and then get knocked out, which is exactly what happened to me when I played Iron Man with Klaw. It was so bad. I got completely annihilated by Klaw in solo when I was playing Iron Man when I played Expert. And then for multiplayer, a similar thing. Iron Man jumps all the way up to the top because he'll have time to set up, and then he'll actually be able to deal with things really easy. His Mark V helmet will be able to deal with all those side schemes as they come out. He'll get to ready up and thwart. He'll thwart, ready up, thwart again, and the Mark V helmet. The side schemes aren't that much of an issue. The two powered gauntlets, once they're out, the minions aren't that much of an issue. And then he has so much damage to lay onto the villain with his supersonic punch and his repulsor blast. So it's just over once he gets set up, and he does have time in multiplayer to get set up. And then I have Black Panther and Captain Marvel. They not really much changes again here because these two characters, like, they don't really have as much weaknesses. So their power in solo versus multiplayer isn't as swingy. Though Black Panther, it is notable that in multiplayer, his Wakanda Forevers are more versatile because there's more things to deal with. But yeah. So then She-Hulk, I moved up above Spider-Man for multiplayer because in multiplayer, She-Hulk will get to flip down a lot and then flip back up, and she can focus on just taking out all the minions that Klaw has out. So the do even lift, dealing 2 damage every time she flips up. It will knock off tough status cards, just flat out take out weapons runners. And then she can just like attack, 1-2 punch, ground stomp, all that stuff, and just take out all the minions, which is really necessary when you fight Klaw. And she fills that role much better than Spider-Man does. Because Spider-Man isn't, even when you choose Justice, he's not particularly strong at it. He just has high economy. So then he is fine and versatile and good. It's not like you wouldn't want him on your team, but he doesn't actually deal with everything in multiplayer as well as these other heroes do, in my opinion. And now onto Ultron. So in solo, Black Panther's the best, and that's because his Retaliate takes out the drones. He can search out the Vibranium armor, stay healed up, and actually keep Ultron on the first side of his scheme. And when Ultron is on the first side of his scheme, he doesn't get as many drone minions and doesn't place the threat. So he's so much easier. So, and then because Black Panther can actually stay in hero form much longer with his vibranium armor. You could even play protection against Ultron and still do well with Black Panther. And just never try to let the main scheme go down until he gets an advance. Very strong strategy. And then once he does, let's say you do lose that main scheme or you have to flip down or whatever it is, if Ultron floods the board with drones, it doesn't matter because you can just use your energy daggers to take out all of them. Even if he has upgraded drones out, you can just use the energy daggers as the last step of the sequence, and then it deals 2 damage instead of 1, so it'll go right through the 2 health as well. So Black Panther is basically a counter matchup to Ultron. On top of that, all those upgrades that Ultron has, where you have to spend the different energy types or resource types, Black Panther with his vibranium can meet that very easy. So in like every way, Black Panther is fantastic against Ultron. And then next, I have Iron Man, which this was a surprise for me when I came back. I played Ultron expecting to lose with Iron Man because I was like, because of my old experience with Iron Man. But then I realized that Ultron's first scheme has 3 threat on it, so that gives you a little bit of time, and his second scheme has 10 threat on it. So that actually gives Iron Man enough time to set up his suit. So when you're playing leadership Iron Man against Ultron here, it's you can very easily get your suit set up and then deal with Ultron, because once you get to that point where you have your full suit out, Ultron's not a problem for Iron Man, which I think is super cool because like Iron Man beating Ultron, it's really fun from the movie perspective. And then Captain Marvel, B tier, just she's super solid, but doesn't have a specifically good matchup against Ultron. It's just she's a solid character with a high economy, so you can just spend a lot of money to deal with what Ultron is doing. But she's not as good at beating Ultron as Iron Man or Black Panther, even in solo, in my opinion. And then I have She-Hulk and Spider-Man all the way down there in D tier. And the reason for that is because when I was playing with the precons, I lost against Expert Ultron. She-Hulk just couldn't quite deal enough damage to actually rush Ultron down, and she couldn't deal with all of the side schemes, so she felt like she was sort of forced into trying to rush Ultron down, but just couldn't do it. Couldn't get enough damage out, and then didn't have the versatility to deal with everything. And then Spider-Man, a similar instance, like stage 2 was fine, but he just couldn't get through all the drones that come out for stage 3 and take out Ultron. He just was falling short on threat and damage by a little bit in every time I played it, which was kind of sad. So I wanted him to do better, but these 2 characters, they just both, I lost with them against Ultron, whereas the other characters, I was winning, and with Black Panther and Iron Man, it wasn't even that difficult to win. Well, it was difficult. I don't want to make it sound like it's easy to win, but relatively, it was easy to win. So then in multiplayer, it's roughly the same. I moved Iron Man up into S tier with Black Panther, but this is the first time I didn't put Iron Man as the best character because in multiplayer, the energy dagger ability for Black Panther to just choose a player and wipe out all the minions is still so versatile and good against Ultron that I think Black Panther is still more valuable in multiplayer against Ultron than Iron Man is. And then Captain Marvel, still really solid, but not as good as Black Panther or Iron Man. And then I moved She-Hulk up because, again, She-Hulk is way better in multiplayer, and she can just focus on doing a bunch of damage to Ultron and taking out a bunch of drones and using ground stomp, all that stuff. Whereas Spider-Man doesn't particularly become better. He can heal up with Aunt May and go to Alter Ego more, but he doesn't really have that like versatile output that these other heroes tend to have against these drone minions. So he can't take out the minions as good as She-Hulk. He can't thwart as good as Iron Man and Captain Marvel. And then dealing his burst damage with the swing web kick just isn't as useful. So yeah, he in my opinion, in multiplayer against Ultron, Spider-Man is by far the weak link against Ultron. And now, since I've talked about all the matchups, I'll talk about my power tier list. So again, the criteria for this is I'm only considering cards released up to this point. It's based on my experience playing them on expert difficulty, and this is just my opinion. So again, if you disagree, totally fine. Just my opinion, and this will likely change as more cards come out because there's only 3 villains right now. So the matchups that these heroes have against these 3 villains at this point in the game's history is extremely important because these are the only scenarios you could play against. So based off just where I put them all in the other tier lists against like for each of the matchups, I landed on this. So for solo, I have Black Panther as being the best, and that's just because of how versatile he is. And both Captain Marvel and Black Panther can deal with Klaw and Rhino fairly easily, but Black Panther deals with Ultron much better than Captain Marvel. So relatively not that different in solo against the other two villains, and then just a better matchup against Ultron. So it's for that reason that I have him higher than Captain Marvel. And plus the versatility of being able to use all four aspects so well and so effectively gives him a bump up in my opinion as well. And then I have Captain Marvel up there with him because she also can just, once you get used to playing her and you understand the villains better, she doesn't like struggle in solo against any of these villains compared to like like when comparing to the other heroes. She does fine. I think Black Panther's just a little bit better. So I have them both up there in S tier. And then below that, I have Spider-Man, and that's because in solo, Iron Man and She-Hulk have more weaknesses in my opinion than Spider-Man has, because his innate economy that he has kind of helps him through his weaknesses in a way that Iron Man and She-Hulk can't. It's like Iron Man in solo can be very difficult, but he can do it. And the fact that he can beat Ultron really well, I think, is a good test for him. So again, he beats Rhino, he beats Ultron, he struggles really hard against Claw. So only like 2 out of the 3. Spider-Man only like 2 out of the 3, and She-Hulk only 2 out of the 3. She struggles against, well, she beats Rhino pretty good, but struggles against both Claw and Ultron. She can beat Claw, but I struggled a lot with her against Ultron. So that's why she's at the bottom. But I think it's worth noting with She-Hulk that if you're playing on standard and using a rush strategy, She-Hulk gets a lot better. And Iron Man's just down there because his weaknesses against Claw and Rhino are just too pronounced for me to justify putting him higher in solo, even though he's really good against Ultron. And in multiplayer, don't think it's much of a surprise here that Iron Man's at the top, just because once he's set up, again, he's the most powerful hero. And then in A tier, Black Panther and Captain Marvel, like this whole time, they fill a similar role to me in that they're just very good in all the scenarios. I have Black Panther higher than Captain Marvel, though, just because of how versatile those Wakanda Forevers are in a multiplayer setting. And then I brought She-Hulk up a little bit above Spider-Man in multiplayer, but they're both fine. So you notice a thing that I think is very critical with this core box is that it feels like it was designed more for multiplayer than solo. So that's why in solo there's this big discrepancy between the heroes and their power levels, because I don't think that the designers were really thinking as much about solo as they did later on with the designs. So the difference in solo by playing Black Panther and Captain Marvel is it's a massive difference in power that you'll feel when playing those other heroes in solo. But then in multiplayer, they all kind of even out. So I don't feel like there's as much of a gap in power in multiplayer with these heroes as there is in solo. And then for my progression series, I wanted to create an overall power tier list. So again, same criteria as before, but I just ranked them kind of averaging out between multiplayer and solo what I thought their power was in those situations. So Black Panther is my S tier, Captain Marvel's my A tier, Iron Man B, Spider-Man C, She-Hulk D. And again, these tiers don't particularly matter at this point just because there's 5 at the time. But for the purposes of just having a list, and since there's 5 heroes, 5 categories, I thought it made sense to just for now put 1 in each category. And then as more heroes come out, the actual tiers will become more accurate, but the relationship between the characters will actually be accurate. It's just not necessarily the tiers. Like, I'm not saying that like Spider-Man is a C tier character overall, or that Captain Marvel isn't like an S tier character overall. So it's likely that like as these new boxes come out, heroes will move both up and down on here, and then as the tiers get more filled out, it'll be a more useful. The actual tier will be more useful. And now we can move on to deck building. So for deck building, I thought about how I wanted to present this, and I thought that it was really just a good idea to start out with the Learn to Playbook, because these precon decks in the back of the Learner Playbook were what I was using this entire time during the progression series. So there's a protection precon, an aggression, a leadership, and a justice. And so I was just taking that deck, slapping it onto a new hero, and just changing aspects by just taking like Black Panther's protection deck and putting it on Spider-Man, for instance, or taking Iron Man's aggression deck and putting it on Captain Marvel. And with these precon decks, I was able to take out all the villains on expert. So it's I thought they were weaker originally when I first started playing, but really like a lot of the reason I was losing when I first started playing was not because my decks were bad. It was just because I didn't know how to play the game very well yet, and I didn't know how the villains functioned yet. So I was making decisions that just weren't the correct decision, and then I thought I had to fix my problem with deck building because it's a deck building game, but that wasn't the case. These precon decks are extremely solid. They all feel really good to play, super fun to play. Actually, more fun. I had more fun playing these precon decks than I was having building my own decks. Because when I was building my own decks that I thought were really strong and then fighting a bunch of difficult villains, it felt like I was kind of doing the same thing over and over again. Whereas when I was playing these precon decks, all of these decks do a little bit of everything. So like I had much more decisions and much more difficult and fun decisions to make than I had when I was playing just like a super optimized, really good deck. Because these decks are really solid. They can beat all the villains and they're fun to play and give you a lot of decisions. So I really recommend just starting with these precon decks and then playing them and just keeping track of what you liked and what you didn't like about them. So play the precon deck. If you notice that you don't like a card or you didn't play a card through the whole deck, maybe consider swapping that. So like keep track of what cards that you didn't end up playing and what cards you really liked playing, and then just add more copies of what you liked playing, and then take out copies of what you didn't like playing. And then just by a very simple iterative process, you'll get to play the game, have fun, and learn deck building at the same time. And I don't think I wouldn't recommend anything else really. But also because the card pool is small enough for me to actually talk about every card that came out in the core box in one video, that's what we're going to do. So starting with basic, this is all the basic cards that came out with the core box. And I added these stars, which the yellow is just like a card that I still consider to be one of the best cards in the game, even at this point after so many cards came out. And green are cards that I thought were underrated. And I think I actually used orange later on a different slide. But yeah, I think the green cards are a little bit underrated or underappreciated, however you want to call that, because I think they're better than they get credit for. So with 3 energy resources, they're like the backbone of everyone's economy. They're going to go into basically every deck you make just because they have such a large impact when you get them. And then Mockingbird and Nick Fury are amazing allies. You know, Nick Fury has the yellow star because he's still one of the best cards in the game and you have access to him in the core box. The versatility with Nick between removing 2 threat, drawing 3 cards, or dealing 4 damage when he enters play, it makes him so powerful that you can put him in basically every deck and he's going to be a great card to see in your hand every time. Mockingbird is essential at this point in the game's history too, because there's not so many allies, so you can't do the like ally spam chunk block strategy as well as you can when you have like 20 allies to choose from. So getting that stun off, having her thwart for 2, and then blocking with her is really good. So getting 2 thwart, 2 blocked villain activations off of a 3-cost card, fantastic value off Mockingbird, and saved me so many times in these playthroughs. And the Avengers Mansion and Helicarrier, fantastic cards, great in multiplayer too. This is another key thing. Resources later in the game tend to be a bit more selfish, and these cards both can go to any player. So they're really good in solo, and they're even better in multiplayer, and super fun. I love both of these cards, and very strong. I recommend not skipping them when you see them in your hand, because when you play them at basically any point where you're not going to lose the game in the next couple turns, it's going to pay off, I promise. And I have a video on the Avengers Mansion on my channel if you want to check that out, where I talk about it more. And then Haymaker is a really cool card. So when we look at these cards, I kind of group them in these categories. So the yellow are cards that I think at this point in the game should probably add these to all of your decks just because you don't have that many other options and they're extremely good. And then for the green, I'd add sometimes, and then the red box, I'd consider cutting them. So like you can see, I switched to the orange star here. I missed that one slide when I was doing my editing. But yeah, Haymaker is, I think, an underrated card because especially at this point in the game's history, it fills a very important role. When you're not playing aggression, you don't have access to attack events at this point. So if you're playing Justice, you don't have any Justice cards that are going to be an attack event, which is not the case going forward in the game's history. So adding Haymaker in at this point into every other aspect except for aggression is really, really good. And it can help you take out minions, and that's good. So like if you're thinking about it, like you might be a little lackluster on like two cost card that does 3 damage, but if you look at it as a 2 cost card that defeats a minion, which is actually what the functional use of it is going to be most of the time, or it can make a giant difference. And first aid, especially when you use it on allies, is extremely valuable. So like the first example that comes to mind is like Daredevil. Every time Daredevil thwarts for 2, he can deal 1 damage to an enemy, which will knock off tough status cards, just do some chip damage. Extremely valuable. So when you're paying 1 cost to heal 2 damage from any character, if you choose Daredevil, you're not just getting 2 health back. You can think of it more like I'm getting 4 threat removal and 2 damage for this 1 cost card, just spread out over time, which is how it will work most of the time. It's like first aid, extremely good on your allies to keep getting consistent output at this point. And then emergency, I don't hate this card. I don't hate Tenacity either. Like there was one game where Tenacity saved me. It was actually the card I needed to win. But then emergency has saved me in the past before as well. But again, I seldom play these 2 cards. So out of all the cards to consider cutting, I'd consider cutting these ones. So emergency, 0 cost event. When the villain schemes, reduce the amount of threat placed on the scheme by 1. So it can save you if you're about to lose, which is very valuable, but most of the time it'll be a dead card. And then Tenacity is just really expensive to get 1 ready because you have to play the upgrade, which is 2 cost. But then in addition to that, you have to spend a physical and discard the card to ready your hero. So you don't even get to have it stick around. So yeah, it's essentially 3 cost with a physical resource requirement to get 1 ready out of your hero, which a lot of the times isn't going to feel worth it. And at this point, this gives us room to talk about the aspects. So at this point in the game's history, the aspects had very clear purposes, which I appreciate because now playing the aspects, it feels like you're more looking for combos and archetypes, and every aspect can kind of do everything once more cards come out. And it kind of makes it less clear like what the identity of the aspect is. But at this point in the game's history, aggression is all about damage and minion slaying. So if you want damage and minion killing, you just have to go to aggression at this point because that's what the aspect does. And if you want thwarting and you want access to your alter ego ability without just losing the game to the threat, justice is where you go. And if you want survivability and control, it's protection. And if you want allies and versatility, it's leadership. So let's talk about them. So aggression, it's surprising. You noticed a lot of stars on this one. Like I didn't really realize this going back, but the aggression aspect bopped at this point in the game's history. It was just a lot coming from me because I've said for a long time that aggression is like my least favorite aspect in the game. But when I'm looking at the core set cards, aggression is not my least favorite aspect in the game, and I really, really enjoy playing aggression. These are like still like my favorite cards in the game in the aggression aspect, and they came out in the core box. So again, the power of aggression, a resource card, extremely valuable, extremely good, one of the best cards in the game still. Hulk is an amazing ally too. 2 cost with 5 health, 3 attack, and then he has this ability after he attacks. If you discard a card, if it has a physical, you deal 2 damage to an enemy. Energy, you deal 1 damage to each character. Mental, you discard Hulk, and wild, all of the above. So like the dream for Hulk is you get 5 physical resources, he deals 5 damage each time he attacks, and you get 25 damage out of Hulk. That doesn't really happen, but it's really fun like trying to optimize your deck around what resource cards you have in to try to increase the consistency of Hulk. And then even if you don't use it into attack, you can still block 2 villain attacks most of the time with Hulk, which is really good. 2 costs to block 2 villain attacks is great. And then when you need the 3 damage in a pinch, awesome. And when you do get that physical resource with Hulk, it feels so good. It's one of the best feelings in the game, having the Hulk ally attack, Hulk smash, deal 3 damage, and then also get 2 extra damage on top of that. And then Tigra is an amazing ally. Has a response of after Tigra attacks and defeats a minion, heal 1 damage from her. So again, back to that minion slaying theme of Tigra can just stick around taking minions out the whole time. There is a bit of a weird rules interaction that I wanted to tell you about with Tigra, because the healing comes before you take consequential damage if you go to the timing charts and the rules. So the first attack Tigra does, she will heal 1, but she doesn't have any damage on her yet, and then she'll take 1. So the first attack you do with Tigra, she'll end up with 1 damage on her, and then after that, you'll heal the 1 damage, and then take the consequential damage. So then she'll just sort of stay at 1 damage for the whole game, which is a little unintuitive. It's not really how I played Tigra when I first started playing, but that's just how the rules work. So if you want to make sure that you're doing it like really pedantically and don't mess up any of the rules, then she'll have 1 damage the whole time. And then Tac Team, I love this card. 3 cost shield support, uses 3 attack counters, and when those are gone, discard the card. Action exhaust Tac Team, remove 1 attack counter from it, and deal 2 damage to an enemy. And the reason I gave this card the orange star for being underrated is because I see a lot of times criticism of this card, just saying it's just too slow and not worth it, and that it doesn't deal enough damage to like in the game and all that type of stuff. And I don't really view Tac Team as that. Tac Team is not a damage card where you're just gonna hit the villain with it 3 times in a row and get 6 damage over 3 turns. That's not the optimal use of it. The way I use Tac Team is to mitigate threats as they come out, mostly minions. So Tac Team to me is a card that I put on the table so that I know that as soon as a minion comes out, I will be able to use the 2 damage to either reach the damage threshold I need to take out the minion, or if it's like a tough minion, knock the tough status card off and then take out the minion, so that I don't have to take that attack from the minion. So that's how I use Tac Team. You want to tactically use Tac Team to control the board and control the minions, not to just attack the villain over and over again. And when you use it that way, it becomes a very, very versatile and powerful card. Combat training, really simple. Just increase your attack. Feels good. A lot of builds really like having more attack, especially ready builds. Great card. Chase them down. Again, back to that minion slaying aspect, back to aggression being the minion slaying aspect. After hero attacks and defeats an enemy, remove 2 threat from a scheme. So now, the aggression player can actually help to mitigate threat removal, which in multiplayer is going to be even better because there will be more minions. So you can add like 3 copies of Chase Them Down, 3 copies of Relentless Assault, and then Relentless Assault is like the premier card at taking out minions even today. 2 costs, where if you use a physical, it gets overkill, and it's 5 damage. That's amazing. And then so you pay 2 costs to do Relentless Assault, take out a minion, maybe deal 2 damage to the villain as well, and then Chase Them Down to remove 2 threat, which amazing combo. I like both those cards a lot. And that's also why I don't have a gold star on Uppercut, because for the same effective resources, you can play Relentless Assault and Chase Them Down, take out a minion, deal a little bit of damage to the villain, and thwart. Whereas Uppercut will just take out a minion or deal 5 damage to the villain, which is not as good. Not that Uppercut isn't useful. It's definitely useful and good for final pushes and doing damage to the villain. But Relentless Assault is going to control the board better, and especially against like Ultron, where there's a bunch of drone minions, it's going to be a much more useful card than Uppercut in most situations, in my opinion. And now on to the justice aspect. So again, quite a few gold stars here. Power of Justice, resources are great, don't need to really go over that much more. But Daredevil and Jessica Jones are both amazing allies. Daredevil's expensive, but he has a great effect of after you get to thwart, you get to deal 1 damage to an enemy. That's amazing because it's just spreading out damage, and especially when you combine that with first aid, like what I was talking about earlier, it becomes a lot. Like Daredevil feels like there's a second hero on the board, and I love that about him. And then Jessica Jones is a 3-cost ally that says Jessica Jones gets +1 thwart for each side scheme in play, which is a really good ability. This type of ability is one I love because I value cards that get you out of tough situations a lot more than I value cards that just help you win more when you were already going to win anyways. So if the villain's flooding you with side schemes, Jessica Jones frequently can get up to like 4 thwart and just take out a side scheme immediately. And related to still being one of the best cards now, especially once player side schemes came out, you can guarantee that Jessica Jones is going to have that +1 thwart. So like the Jubilee hero, where it starts out with shopping spree, I love that for Jessica Jones. So Jessica Jones is a card that scales really well into the game's lifespan. And Surveillance Team, I think, is a bit of an underrated card. It's like the obvious comparison here is comparing Surveillance Team for Justice, which I do have a yellow star on for Justice because just 2 costs to get 4 threat removal is extremely good. And Surveillance Team, in a lot of cases, is actually better than for Justice. Like, for Justice is often going to be better in multiplayer because you're just trying to get as much output and thwart as you can. But in solo, especially, the ability to store these counters and get thwart when you need it is very valuable. Because if you have an event, like for Justice, if you draw for Justice when there's no threat on the main scheme, it's not a very valuable card. So you'll have to hold it in your hand and waste a resource, or it's just a dead card and then you lost your for Justice and you don't have it when you need it. Whereas Surveillance Team, you play it and then it actually helps you out a lot. You can store the counters for when you need it, and it actually combos well with cards like for Justice, in my opinion, because your other thwarts that you do will be less wasted. So you can think of a side scheme. If a side scheme has like 3 threat on it, for instance, and your hero has 2 thwart, you can exhaust and thwart 1 with the Surveillance Team, and then you can save the for Justice for the main scheme. Whereas if you didn't have Surveillance Team, you might have to just for Justice that the side scheme and waste some thwart. So like think the versatility of Surveillance Team is very good. An Interrogation Room, I think, is a fine card. After you defeat a minion, exhaust Interrogation Room, remove 1 threat from the scheme. That's fine. There's a lot of minions. Again, Ultron exists, so it has its uses, but it's not like, it's fine. It's just fine, in my opinion. Then the Heroic Intuition, great card because stats are good. And then Great Responsibility. This is kind of similar to the Emergency, where you get to like get out of a pinch and you get to take damage instead of threat being placed on the scheme, so you can mitigate a villain's thwart or scheme activation against you in exchange for taking damage. So like Spider-Man's on the cover, Aunt May heals him up, pretty good combo there. But it's a bit harder to use than these other cards and more of a niche card. And then Protection. So again, resource is great, and there's some pretty cool cards in Protection too. Black Widow is an interesting ally. 3 cost for 2 health, 2 thwart, 1 attack, and then crucially the Interrupt ability says when a card is revealed from the encounter deck, exhaust Black Widow and spend a mental resource, cancel the effects of that card and discard it, then reveal another card from the encounter deck. Which, that ability is extremely good in certain situations. So when you're canceling a card like Shadow of the Past, for instance, that's pretty good. When you're canceling the like Venom Goblin's Goblin Glider, that's pretty good. But a lot of the times, I've found Black Widow thwarts 2 for me, and she sort of sits around and doesn't do anything for a long time. So, I don't know, I might like Black Widow less than other people. She just doesn't feel as impactful as I'd like her to. Luke Cage, on the other hand, is expensive, but I think he's extremely good. Because Luke Cage, if you can control the board, can get a lot of output for you, because he has a tough status card, so he can block a full villain attack. But he has 5 health and 2 attack. So you can get 8 damage out of Luke Cage and then have him block again. So 2 blocked villain activations and 8 damage if spread out over a long time. If you can pull that off, great for Luke Cage. And then Med Team, I love Med Team, especially on allies, keeping allies alive with it, and then healing up heroes when you need it. It's very versatile, great in multiplayer. It's a great card. Indomitable is like pretty good for like these like perfect defense builds. And I think it probably gets better later on, but currently just blocking and then readying and then blocking again, it's fine, but it's not great. It's good in multiplayer, not all that useful in solo. It's just fine. And Armored Vest stats are good. Counter Punch is interesting because you get to deal damage to the villain after you defend, which can be fun. Great for high attack heroes. I think it's better on characters like Hulk and She-Hulk who can defend more. Yeah, it has its uses. And then Get Behind Me. When a treachery card is revealed from the encounter deck, cancel its when revealed effects, and the villain attacks you instead. So similar to Black Widow, you don't get to cancel it outright, but you replace it with another card with another effect. So yeah, Get Behind Me can be good in good situations, but then also it can not be good in some situations. So yeah, again, protection is my least favorite aspect in the core box, I'd say. Not that I don't like the cards. Like, I really like Med Team and Armored Vest and Luke Cage, but the rest of it I'm kind of meh on, because like this is just a personal opinion. I don't really enjoy canceling an effect, like spending my resources to cancel one effect just to get another. Like, that's not my favorite thing. Even though it can be very good, it's just not that fun for me. But yeah, anyways, this is protection. And then moving on to leadership. So leadership comes with a lot of good cards as well. So Power of Leadership is good. But then specifically Hawkeye and Maria Hill and Make the Call are still so good. Like, still amazing cards. Hawkeye is essential for taking on Ultron because that response of using the 4 arrow counters to take out minions when they enter play. Again, this isn't limited. So 4 minions come into play. You can use his ability 4 times. That's great. So like recycling Hawkeye with Make the Call is one of the main strategies to beat Ultron. Maria Hill is I don't even know what to say. It's like 2 costs for an ally with 2 thwart that lets every single player draw a card. So in 4 player, Maria Hill comes into play and draws the team 4 cards on a 2 cost ally that has good stats. Like, that's absolutely crazy to me that card exists. She's so good. Vision is really fun. I didn't like Vision that much when I started playing, but I liked him a lot more coming back to him here, specifically with like Captain Marvel because and Iron Man and stuff, because the energy resources are integral to their kits. So using that energy resource to get either 4 attack or 3 thwart out of him is extremely useful, and it definitely saved me a couple times, and I had a lot of fun playing Vision. And that's one of the things I loved about coming back to this core set, is that cards like Vision kind of just like got left behind as I moved on. But coming back to him, I had so much fun playing Vision. And Triskelion, you get to increase your ally limit by 1, which it's kind of hard to make use of this at this point in the game's life cycle because it's just not that many allies, right? So leadership, your deck only has 5 allies in it. That's the most allies you can get in a deck at this point. So like having an ally limit of 4 just isn't that good at this point, but it'll become better later. Lead from the front is really useful because you get to choose a player. That character gets +1 thwart, +1 attack till the end of the phase. The thing I think about with this is Iron Man. So since Iron Man has a built-in ready with his arc reactor and can get 3 allies out pretty easy, then Lead from the front has a lot of output and is great for final pushes. A super good card. Also good in the mid game when you need to clear side schemes and stuff. Getting up from 2 to 3 thwart is a big deal because a lot of side schemes have 3 threat, and then you don't have to thwart twice. You can just take it out once. So with 1 thwart, that's really good. Readying an ally, again, great for when you need that output, especially from characters like Vision that have a lot of output. I love it on Nick Fury because Nick Fury's going to leave play anyways, so you might as well get the value out of him while you can. Make the Call, paying the printed cost of an ally in any player's discard pile is so good. So like you can make the call and then you can go grab Hulk, the ally, or instance, or Tigra, for instance, or Luke Cage, whatever you want, which I think that's the main way you'd make use of the Triskelion. At this point in the game's life cycle is playing 3 copies of Make the Call and then creating a team of allies from all the different aspects by playing cards out of the other players' discard piles. But again, much better in solo than in multiplayer. And then Inspired, just upgrade your allies' stats. So again, great for Vision, but there's not a ton of great targets for Inspired at this point in the game. It's like pretty much just Vision. But if someone else was playing the Hulk ally or Luke Cage or something like that, it is definitely worth putting Inspired on them because they have a lot of output. Like Luke Cage, I think, and Daredevil are amazing targets for Inspired. But again, multiplayer, not solo. It's like multiplayer, everything gets so much better in multiplayer at this point in the game's life cycle. I really, really think that this was meant for multiplayer. And then one of the reasons I put the stars on these allies is because there's this like general assumption in card games that cards, that there's just power creep and then cards become progressively stronger over time. And then highlighting just how powerful these cards in the core set are, I think, is a great way to show that like that's not the case for Marvel Champions. So like saying that like, oh, this card is the new cards are just going to be better, or they should be better, or you're like expecting them to be better than the old cards. Not the case. I I would be shocked if they printed an ally that has a stronger effect than Maria Hill letting 4 players draw a card. Like these core box cards are fantastic. They aged really well, and I had a great time playing them. And even if you don't have that many expansions for Marvel Champions, you have a bunch of great cards to use, which is why I wanted to add these stars to show just how cool all of these cards are. Yeah, and this brings us to the end. If you made it all the way here, I appreciate it. And yeah, in summary of this whole long video, the core box has a bunch of extremely powerful cards. The heroes and the cards are still relevant to this day. I love all of these heroes, all of these villains. It's the core box is what really got me into this game, is because the core box is so good that I just wanted to keep playing. And I think that this is the best Marvel Champions product. And I highly recommend this to anyone, even if you don't have a bunch of things. Like if you just want to get your friends into the game, core box is a great way to do it. If you want to have just a great game to play with your friends or even by yourself, solo works totally fine. It's a lot harder with the core box. Like that's not the strength of the core box is solo, but you can always play two-handed. And yeah, I love this game. So like, I wanted this video is basically just a love letter from me to Marvel Champions as a game, because it's so good and it's given me so much joy over all this time. And I wanted to share that with all of you, that anyone who watches this video, I wanted to share how much I like this game with all of you. And I hope that you can like it as much as I do. And return to the core box, please. If you're someone that's been around with Marvel Champions for a long time, and you're kind of like getting burnt out, or you don't feel like you want to play as much as you used to, highly recommend come back to the core box, try out those pre-con decks, fight Rhino, fight Klaw, fight Ultron. It's nostalgic, which it has that going for it, but it's also just a blast. Like I was so shocked with how good the core box was coming back to it after getting lost in all of these like expansions and campaigns and all this complicated stuff and these complicated heroes and all of these interactions and deck building for like everything. It was so nice coming back to just this simple, well-crafted, fun experience. And I want all of you to do that. And then I wanted to mention that if you want to hang out with me while I played a lot of these games on stream for the progression series. I'll be playing on stream for like the rest of the progression series on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 5 to 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on YouTube and Twitch. So then also join the Discord, and the links will be in the description. And stay zesty. I'll see you next time. Peace.